Welcome to the CDN Women in Leadership podcast. My name is Valerie Jackman, Leadership Lead at CDN.
And my name is Joanna Campbell, Principal and Chief Executive of Dumfries and Galloway College.
The podcast is designed for women who are working in education and aspire to progress their career to the next level. The podcast focuses on what women can do and how they can leverage their strengths to advance and thrive in their career.
Today, we'll be exploring the topic of building effective strategic relationships and also exploring the concept of sisterhood. And I'm delighted to welcome our guest, Catherine McWilliam, who is the Nations Director for the Institute of Directors in Scotland. Welcome, Catherine. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today.
Hello, Joanna and Valerie. Thank you very much for having me here. It's lovely to be with you both.
Fantastic. Catherine, could you perhaps start by telling us about your own leadership journey to where you are today?
Yeah, of course I can. So I've been Nations Director for IoD Scotland since the 1st of September in 2022, but been with the IoD since October 2021. And I have to be really honest with you, one of the key things that drew me to the IoD initially was the opportunity to work with the then National Director, Louise MacDonald, who is now the Director General for the Economy within the Scottish Government, but was the former Chief Exec from Young Scot. Louise was somebody I had admired throughout my entire career, going back as far as 2012 when I worked for a PR and communications consultancy in Edinburgh. And one of my clients was a coalition of charities campaigning for better rights and support for children with additional support needs. And through that work, excuse me, I first became aware of Louise through social media. It was through Twitter. And I just thought, my goodness, who is this, incredible person who just has such a way of talking to people and bringing people with her. The messaging that she used was always spot on. So the opportunity to experience Louise as my leader, as my boss, was just one that was too good an opportunity to pass up. Going back right to the very start of my career, I suppose, I did PR and communications at Queen Margaret University, and I've always been fascinated with just how we communicate as humans. I remember sitting with the careers advisor at Stranraer Academy and them having a conversation with me about, what I wanted to do when I grew up. I'm still trying to work that out, to be honest. And I remember saying to her, I just want to do something that doesn't involve maths. I hate it. I want to drop that as quickly as I can. And it was always English and the social sciences that I really enjoyed. And I just loved, I suppose, how we communicated and how we talked to one another. Sociology was another subject that fascinated me. So I found myself at Queen Margaret University, initially studying media and marketing. And the great thing about that course was that in your first and second year, you got such an overview of everything that the schools had to offer. And I quickly discovered that media was not my forte. I should have had an indication when I failed higher media studies at school before I went on to study at university. But anyway, I then discovered that public relations was an area that I really enjoyed, and I really liked the thought of supporting organisations to look at their communications and their reputation and how, we as people could help construct what that reputation and what that brand would look like and how it would be perceived. So moved into that line of work and got my degree, and that was all great, but then had that classic, I suppose, moment where I finished uni and I thought, I don't have the experience right now that's going to let me get a job that'll allow me to pay for rent in a flat in Edinburgh or Glasgow. So I packed my bags and moved back home to get said experience, and found myself working for Dumfries and Galloway Council, delivering a project which was called the Community Engagement Project, and it was funded by Fairer Scotland at the time. Yeah. And the purpose of that project was to go out and speak to people within the Wigtonshire area and help them re-engage with the council services that were available to them. So take, for example, the council-led job clubs that were happening, or people who had disengaged from education that maybe might like to get more involved, or those that maybe needed some extra support from a literacy and numeracy point of view. And that was a 2-year project, and it was such a good experience for me in terms of putting me out my comfort zone. A big part of the job was door knocking, and you never knew, who was going to answer the door to you, how you were going to be, received by said person who was answering the door, whether they would, get the dog to chase you down the driveway because you'd been, annoying them. And it was a really interesting role, just in speaking to different stakeholders and different audiences and thinking about how I then presented myself in those different situations. And it was that classic. I was just getting into the swing of things, and the funding stopped. The funding came to an end and it wasn't renewed. So I found myself thinking, right, okay, I would really like to get away and, do something else, using some of the skills I learned at university, but just wasn't quite getting. I was just getting knockbacks from the types of agencies I was going to. So totally rethought everything, and was very fortunate. I had an aunt in America based in San Francisco, and she had a friend who ran a PR agency, and that friend very kindly offered me an internship in San Francisco.
Oh, wow.
So I found myself working for Mighty PR, which at the time it was a startup. It was quite a new organisation. There was only 2 or 3 employees, and they did a lot of work around tech and mobile. And back in 2012, the iPhone 5 was just coming out, and push notifications and apps and social media, as it was still very much in its infancy. And I found myself working for an agency that had a specialism across all of these areas. So there's one day in particular that sticks in my mind, the day the iPhone 5 launched. And one of our clients was a company called Spec, and they created accessories for mobile phones. And there was this huge, big kind of hush-hush thing going on because Apple had changed the shape of the phone, the iPhone, for the first time. And there was a lot of guesswork going on about the dimensions of the products and the accessories. And I remember packing all these boxes for journalists with, samples, and then having to sit and phone the journalists up to try and get them to, cover the spec product. And again, it was thinking about, well, I need to win these people over. I've got a minute here to make them think that my product's the one that they need. And it just was, yes, it was a fabulous experience. And again, all good things come to an end. The visa that I was on only had to be in the country temporarily. But after I had completed that internship, I had something that made my CV a bit different to everybody else's. Fast forward, came back to Edinburgh and got the job with Orbit, where I worked on a variety of different clients, including the Coalition of Charities, but also did a lot of work around commercial wind farm development. And the best way to describe that was me going in to communities as the sacrificial lamb to try and sell this idea of a community having a wind farm up on the hillside. And I got that role within Orbit because of my community engagement experience I'd had with Dumfries and Galloway Council. So I found myself bringing together my degree, but also my experience that I'd had in the workplace, and looking at how I engaged with different stakeholders. Now, I remember again one particular example in Dumfries and Galloway, an ex-coal mining community, where there was an application for quite a large wind farm. And this was the time, I think Dumfries and Galloway Council had a ridiculous, 50 live applications at the time for wind farms around the countryside. Everybody was trying to get in before the national grid reached capacity, and it was a no-go again. And what we had with the community that we were talking to was a community that had been kind of really adversely affected by the closure of the coal mining industry, and it had never quite picked itself back up again. And the community saw a real opportunity with the proposed community benefit funds from this wind farm to really deliver lasting change at a local level. And it was really interesting because there were still people who were vehemently opposed to it, but there were some really forward-thinking people within that community that thought, actually, we could use this money in a really sustainable long-term way that's going to not just benefit us for the 25 years that the wind farm's here, but for the next 100 years if we think about how we really effectively use it. And during that time, I built up quite a relationship with, the community council and others, local schools. And I really, really enjoyed that. I really liked that, that public face and engagement that I had. And it was that classic case of you got to the point where the planning application was submitted and then my work was done. And I then got kind of pulled out, and I did it. I did that role for 2.5 years, and again, I got to see lots of Scotland through it. It was fabulous, but there was something missing for me, and I realised it was that work at a community level that I particularly enjoyed. So then I found myself scrolling through Good Moves, and there was a job with Development Trusts Association Scotland, or DTAS as it's better known.
Yeah, yeah.
And it basically was a two-part role that was communications and community engagement. And I thought, my goodness, I'd never seen a job advert that was more me. If I could have said exactly what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And I went into DTAS with very much that mindset. I thought this job was made for me, and you guys need to, you need to see that. And thankfully, I managed to convince them when I got them round the table, because I think at the time I was in my mid to late 20s. I think I was 26 at the time. And I I do think they were looking for somebody with a bit more experience. But what I actually had in the experience that I had gained over the past couple of years, they weren't able to match up elsewhere, because I also had that comms background. So I went into DTAS, and it was one of the best experiences I've ever had in my life, in terms of work environment. It was a really supportive space to be working within. And it just so happened that at that time, my career was going very well, but I experienced, the first kind of hardships in my personal life. I lost my first grandparent. My mum got breast cancer. She's absolutely fine now, thank goodness. But it was a space where I could have gone to pieces, but I was so supported by the team that I was with. It made me, want to do more. And I loved it. And through DTAS, I did a variety of different roles and moved up through the kind of development officer ranks while still doing my communications. But then I got to a point after about 6.5 years where I thought, this is great and I love it, but I'm not going to be able to get. I then, discovered my ambition, and I thought,
Yeah.
I'm not going to be able to take this next level in my career with such a niche area of experience. I need to broaden my network, broaden my own experience and my horizons. And I started quietly looking around for other opportunities, and it just so happened at that time the IoD was recruiting for the first role that I did, which was senior branch manager. And that then goes back to that point about Louise and how I ended up there.
That's so lovely. Yeah.
Amazing, such an amazing journey, Catherine. And you spoke about effective communications, you spoke about your own personal resilience and overcoming that. And then that whole thing about, taking that risk to do something different, but also ultimately a leap of faith as well. So really, really fascinating. And I didn't know you'd worked in Silicon Valley. So there you go. I've learned something new in all of that.
Yeah. And
Valerie.
what I love when I hear these stories as well is that you really couldn't write a script for it. It is about following your passion and following the things that you're interested in. So thank you for sharing that with us. So, and today we're really talking about building effective strategic relationships, and it sounds as if you've done a fair bit of that, and exploring the notion of sisterhood. So as the IoD has been, really successful in building and leveraging strategic relationships. And as its director for Scotland, I wondered if you could talk us through, your own experience of how you have built effective strategic relationships.
Absolutely. And I mean, it's such a timely question actually to be asking that, Valerie, because one of the things that I'm very aware of coming into the role as Nations Director, and I think I wouldn't have been as aware of it had I not had that prior experience with working with the IoD, was just everything that we do is about adding value for our members. So the question I'm always asking myself in any piece of work that I do is, what will the members think of this? Will it help? Will it add value? Will it support the membership? And one of the things that we've been exploring as IoD Scotland, the way that we're kind of set up is there's myself and one other that are the staff team. So we're very, very low on resource, but we have this fantastic network of ambassadors who run our kind of 7 branches throughout Scotland. And with everything that's been going on in the wider economy and the uncertainty that's facing a number of our business leaders right now, the big thing for me has been about looking at ways that we can support members at both a local, national Scotland-wide level and then a UK level. And that's the kind of the three spaces that we can, kind of provide that value. So at a local level, with my branch chairs and my committees, we're looking at other organisations that we can partner up with to deliver events, to create those kind of connections where you're not just bringing the same people into the room to quite often have the same conversations. We're looking at ways that we can bring different people together, get different conversations going and stimulate ultimately different outcomes. At a national kind of Scotland level, it's much more about, well, how can we pull that together and look at how we can, I suppose, influence at that level. So, looking at our longer, our vision and strategy, for instance, is trying to bring on board a younger demographic of members. So for me, I'm thinking, right, what other organisations and stakeholders can I reach out to and make aware of IoD Scotland and what it is that we're working towards? But how can I also do that in a way where I recognise the value I've got in my existing membership? Some of them maybe are getting towards the later stages of their careers, but then have 20, 30 years of insight and experience that they are possibly going to be able to share with younger and aspiring directors coming through. So for me, I'm thinking, well, there's a real opportunity there to bridge a bit of a gap and support entrepreneurs and startup leaders coming into the workspace. But also there's some reverse mentoring there as well, because we can actually support those who maybe are not as technologically savvy or as aware of the kind of digital evolution that has taken place over the past decade or so. And I think it's very much about looking at what the issues are that affect our members and what's going to help them move their own thinking and discussions on. And we have key areas that we're looking to be very active in, like sustainability and ED&I. And I mean, that's a conversation for another day, because I think we're all very guilty of looking at those two things in silos. And it's about, well, how do we actually, embed them in the DNA of our organisations?
Yeah.
But on that very point, one of the things I think that we need to be doing is sharing case studies and best practice and highlighting, where people have done a really good job. And again, you get those stories and you get those anecdotes and that feedback by building relationships with people and just having conversations. And I think that's one of the most important things that we need to be thinking about just now.
I like what you said there, Catherine, about the alliances that you've built and learning that reverse mentoring aspect. And, I'm very aware that certainly within my sector, we have a lot of experienced leaders, but equally there's a need to reach into those who have, who are aspiring future leaders, and there's a lot that we can learn from them. So, and you've just given an example of where you're looking at that in the Institute of Directors, and I think that's really fascinating, and I'd be keen to hear more about that once you've got, more case studies, if you like, of how successful that's been, because I'm sure it will be successful.
Absolutely, and I think it's about leveraging that talent that we've got from across the ecosystem of our membership right now. One of the things, one of the biggest issues that members tell us that they're faced with is talent and skills. Getting the right talent and the right skills into their organisations. And I've been having lots of conversations about the fact that we're seeing lots of senior leaders leaving the workforce early. And I could that sometimes that's through director fatigue, sometimes that's through just an opportunity to kind of move on. People are looking at moving into non-exec roles as opposed to executive. And I think, whilst there might be issues further down the line with that, we've again got a real opportunity to look at, well, who are these ambitious younger directors coming through? Can we, help support with the skills and the tools and the resources to help people take that leap of faith and that step up into becoming a leader and support, the future growth and sustainability of those organisations?
What's worked particularly well, would you say? I'm thinking as well, how would you encourage others?
I think sharing is definitely the key to all of this, because you don't know what you don't know. And I think one of the most important things for particularly, those who are aspiring leaders, I suppose, because I think we run the risk of saying young all the time. People assume it's young in age, but maybe it could be young in terms of experience. But thinking about aspiring leaders and those who are very much on that journey, it's you need to be able to see good examples. You need role models, and you need to be able to ask the questions in a safe space where you feel like you're not going to get judged or shot down. And I think that's what's worked very well for us recently, is we are, through our events, through our own member networks, through our local branches and the work of our ambassadors, we're looking at creating those spaces for those conversations to take place. And what's nice is that being a leader is a very lonely space at times. And over the course of the past 12, 18 months, business leaders have been expected to have all the answers, and they don't. And whether you're a new director, or you're a longer in the tooth director that's been doing it for years, there is still uncertainty out there, and you will not know the answer to everything. But having that mechanism and that network to tap into, to ask those questions and just sense check that you're not alone in how you're feeling, is incredibly powerful. And I think is where the IoD really has something to offer.
Oh, lovely, thank you. And you go, Joanna.
I was just going to add to that. I think you're right. Leadership is a lonely place. And that's why those strategic relationships are so important. And the thing I like about IoD is that you're able to build those strategic relationships across your own, out with your own sector, and really develop that network of peers that you can lean into for support, and take informal soundings. So I think what you described there, certainly I've had value from some of the events that you've been running, and been able to speak to other people who are there in a similar position. And I've followed that up after the events as well, and some of these people are within my strategic relationships, and I value that very much.
That is exactly what it's all about. And I think it's one of those things where maybe, even at the time, if you go along even to, an informal networking reception and you're talking to people, you're not necessarily at the time thinking, I must ask the question and I must get the answer to this because I need to feed back on, X, Y, Z. At the time, you're just looking at building a rapport with people, building a relationship and building a bit of trust. And I think that is where it's then so important to, when the time comes, to be able to go and say, could really do with talking to you about this. And I remember a previous conversation that, you indicated you've got experience there, and it's just, it's knowing where to go, I think, and not feeling stuck. I mean, we have, people that experience all sorts of different situations, both positive and negative. And again, it's just, well, where do you find the information? If you're an SME based in Dumfries and Galloway, and you have the opportunity to export your product on an international level, and you've only been going 18 months, yes, there are all sorts of organisations you can go to for fact sheets and help, but you imagine being part of a network where you can pick up the phone to somebody you met at a networking event and saying, well, I'm not sure, can you, how did you do it? What do I need to be aware of? What's worked, and more importantly, what didn't? That's absolutely golden. And just having that opportunity, it's you can't put a price on it, really, can you, in the value of it?
So, Catherine, when we're staying with that theme of leveraging strategic relationships, I think my sort of perspective on it, and actually I think it's widely documented as well, women are often less comfortable with leveraging those strategic relationships. What's your experience of this, and would you agree with that?
I do agree with it, and it absolutely pains me to have to agree with it, because we shouldn't be. And I know, I remember coming into this role and having lots of conversations about imposter syndrome, and, people who within my network who are, mentors to me and have supported me, tell me, you're going to fight with this every day for a while. And at the time I thought, yeah, whatever. But oh my goodness, it's so right. You find yourself just going into situations and you think, well, I'm the newbie here. I don't know what I'm doing. People are going to think I'm a daft wee lassie. All of these things run in your head. And I think at times we are far too apologetic, one, about asking for help. We feel that it's a sign of weakness, and it absolutely is not. And two, we feel almost apologetic by asking people to support what we're trying to do. And we shouldn't be. And I think there's this the whole gender argument is one that particularly in leadership positions is one that can get people quite exercised. But I think setting all of that to the side and thinking about that whole sisterhood idea, as women we have a real opportunity to use the positions that we are in to make it easier for those that are coming up behind us.
Yeah.
And that's definitely something that I want to do in every aspect of my life. I have grown up surrounded by strong women, be it kind of in the family setting, my friends, my colleagues, even women you look at in the media. There are some fantastic role models out there. And I think naively perhaps if maybe one of these days we've got to break that ceiling that's going to kind of change the narrative and change the dialogue. And maybe it's coming, maybe it's not. I was at a really interesting event last week that Open University and BBC Scotland were doing, and it was outstanding women who changed modern Scotland, and it's a 3-part series that's been presented by Kirsty Warwick. And in the panel discussion after that, there was a lot of conversation about social media and how that has started to have quite a negative effect on women in leadership positions, specifically women in politics. And I think we do have to be quite careful about the toxicity that's kind of floating about in the air at the moment. And actually, as a sisterhood and as women, we need to stand stronger together and support each other and, celebrate achievement, recognise good practice and share the stories so that we can break down the barriers and stop them, becoming bigger than what they need to be.
Yeah, I think you're right with that, Catherine. And going back to what you were saying there about imposter syndrome, I think everybody suffers from that when you're new into CEO role. But I think I think women quite often suffer more of that than men, because I think generally speaking, and this may be a bit of a sweeping statement, but I think men generally suffer from hubris more, or display hubris more than women. And I think generally speaking, women are you don't have the same confidence levels because of that imposter syndrome, possibly. But in terms of sisterhood, and you spoke really eloquently about it there, is there any sort of advice that you could offer women on how to create that support network across female CEOs? I mean, for example, what has worked well for you?
I think openness and letting yourself be vulnerable is it's authenticity. If you're open and you let people see that you don't know all the answers and you're fully prepared to admit you don't know all the answers, it creates that transparency there, and it starts to build the trust from day one. And I think that's what we need to do. I think we all need to trust each other and talk to each other and create opportunities to get together in safe spaces. We're actually looking as IoD Scotland, there are a group of members and non-members actually, and we're looking at pulling together a kind of pilot around safe space women in leadership conversations, a place to just go and share your experiences, both positive and negative, and talk about what has shaped how you lead as a leader. And it's something that eventually I would like to see rolled out across all of our 7 branches, because I think there's something very powerful in that localized approach as well. Knowing that there's somebody in the same geographic area as you that perhaps, as you identified earlier, Joanna, as a different industry or sector, but you can maybe meet for a coffee and have that really, really safe discussion where that they're not a competitor. It's not somebody that's going to Yeah, I just think trust is important.
It so is. And I was working with a group of senior leaders last week, and we were talking about imposter syndrome, and the women seem to feel that it's the women that feel it. And interestingly, the men that were there were saying, no, actually, we feel it as well. But it's not something that you can openly say as a man. There's a different kind of pressure on men. But one of the things that came from that conversation was that they felt that if going for a more senior role, men felt that they had to show they had the potential to fulfill the role, whereas women felt they had to prove that they could do it. And I wonder if there's something around the women just supporting each other to see the potential that they have, that each other has. And I wonder if you think there's a place for that, you're talking about trust and being vulnerable, but also being able to share and help each other see what potential we have and develop that.
Absolutely, Valerie. I completely agree with that. And just as you were talking there, it got me thinking about some of the work that Women on Boards UK does. And it's very much about that, recognising the different, I suppose, not ticks, that's the wrong way to describe it, but the different inherent things that men and women have that they work through. And actually, I mean, I was at one of the very first events I attended as an IoD Scotland employee was a Women on Boards IoD Scotland networking event. And I was really struck at the number of men in the room. And I, got talking to some of them, and they were saying, well, actually, there's a real role here for allyship. Because we talk about the sisterhood and women supporting women, and I absolutely think that is a critical thing, and all women should have a network of a sisterhood that they can reach out to, and as should men, because there's a whole thing about women are much better at discussing their feelings and their emotions than men are, and actually there's a whole space that for men to feel safe to be able to do that. But then meeting in the middle, there's allyship, and there's those who can see inequality making a conscious effort to address it. And that comes from a gender, from an ethnicity, from a cultural, from an inclusive point of view. There's something even in that. And I remember those conversations were just exactly around that with women who were saying, well, I had to work very hard to prove that I was able to do be in the position that I'm in. And conversely, the men were feeding back that they continue to have to work very hard to prove that they should be in the position that they're in. And it's just it's that old adage, was it men are from Mars and women are from Venus, or vice versa. There's something that makes us distinctly different, but actually through the vehicle of allyship, maybe we can start to bridge that gap a wee bit.
There's some interesting work being done by a woman called Dr. Tina Opie. She's actually American, and I love Harvard Business Review, and I actually stumbled across her in one of the HBR IdeaCast podcasts. I can't say that, it's difficult to say. Anyway, HBR IdeaCast podcast, and she speaks about shared sisterhood. In fact, she's written a book on it. We'll try and find the link, Valerie, and we'll put it in the notes for the podcast. But she talks about 3 practices. Dig, which is about reflecting on yourself and your own strengths, and the other practice is about bridge, and that's about developing interpersonal connections with others. And then the third aspect of shared sisterhood is about collective action. So that's the allyship and doing something together and really challenging equity in the workplace and reaching out to others who have a common purpose to do that. So I haven't read the book, I have to confess. I will read the book because it sounds fascinating, but Tina Opie, if you Google her, she's done TED Talks and all sorts. Fascinating.
She sounds exactly like the type of person I need in my sisterhood.
Exactly. Okay, so we're almost at the end, Catherine, and I think what would be really good for our listeners to hear is what top 3 tips would you like to give women who want to progress their career and their leadership journey. So forgetting about strategic relationships or sisterhood, just top 3 tips, any tips about anything at all in terms of women in leadership?
First thing I would say is just don't be afraid and put yourself out there, ask questions and build your connections. For me, it has been incredibly useful to have mentors around me. Some of them don't even know they're my mentors because it's not official, but people that I feel comfortable picking up the phone to and, can you just, if you get time for a quick cup of coffee to chat about X and building that network in that safe space. And trust yourself, trust your instinct, trust your gut, and just go for it. I remember having a real tussle with myself. It was a family party. It was my grandparents' diamond wedding, and I was at this stage where I didn't know whether I was going to apply for this role or not. And I spoke to lots of different members of my family about what I thought were the kind of the pros and cons and kind of weighed everything up. And ultimately they all kept saying, it's your decision, you're the one that's got to go for it. And I kept thinking, but what if it's the wrong decision? What if I get it wrong? And ultimately I came back to trusting my gut, and in my gut it felt like this was the right thing for me to do, and I wanted to almost prove to myself that I could. And I think that's almost, that's what drives me. And I think that's another kind of tip, is really think about what drives you, what motivates you, what gets you out your bed in the morning, and make sure that you are doing something that helps that drive continue. Because we spend far too long a period of our lifetime working to not enjoy it.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Those are brilliant tips. And I'm so glad you did apply for that job. And the rest now is history. So thank you very much from me, Valerie.
Yeah, that brings us to the end of today's episode. Thank you so much, Catherine. What a wonderful, inspiring journey, and what great tips that you're passing on to other women on their journey. Thank you both.
Thank you very much for having me. It's been a pleasure.